You may remember that I reported having issues with the car staying in gear when I went up a steep hill at high speeds. Usually third gear would start popping out, and it was just a nuisance. I had the transmission cover plate off and had a peek inside. We found loads of metallic shavings, brass especially, and I deducted that to a worn out shift fork because they are made out of brass in this particular car. And they can just, bend and wear out over time. Then third gear won't engage properly, and that will make it easier for it to jump back out. I searched everywhere for a new shift fork. I couldn't find anything, and since I wasn't quite fond with that idea of a brass shift fork anyways, I decided, you know what, let's just go to town and buy an entirely new transmission. And with that, I opened a whole other can of worms. Apparently it is sadly easier to get your hands on a complete transmission rather than just a shifting fork. This one obviously needs a tidy up, but actually looks mighty fine inside. Now, one thing to note here is that this is not the model year 1953, this is a later version, and it has improved shifting forks. These are no longer made out of brass, but they're instead forged steel, and therefore they should last much longer and wear less. This is also a model which already has synchronized first gear.
Psych! That's the wrong
transmission. You see, I was all happy about having a later model with reinforced and whatnot. Fact of the matter is that this end piece here is longer than the one on mine, and I can't just swap this end piece over because the output shaft is also longer, and since this is fully synchronized instead of partially synchronized, the entire output shaft is a whole different thing. So I'm going to have to go back to the parts vendor and get me a proper transmission. Another day, another transmission. Long story short, this has the shorter extension. I have swapped it out for the other one, and this one sadly was in a rather sorry state on the outside. It did turn fine and the inside looked great. So I figured before, taking it apart and risking any debris from the outside falling into the casing and ruining it all, why not clean it up? So we have a parts washer at work. I put it in there, and well, the grit and grime was stuck so badly on here that it didn't do anything. So I figured, well, this is all sealed up, right? So I guess it doesn't hurt if from a distance I go ahead and lightly sandblast it. Well, the dirt was so stuck that I couldn't go from a distance. I had to aim right at it, and after finishing basically the whole darn thing, I noticed, wait a minute, there's two huge holes in the front, and this seal ring here in the back doesn't actually seal against the shaft. So, from a nicely spinning transmission, it now sounds like that, and you can't shift it anymore. So, we'll have to replace the seals in here anyways, and for that it'll have to come apart. Looks like I'm going to have to take it apart a little bit more detailed. There is a special tool to remove the pin which holds the speedo drive in place. And there is also a special tool to remove the speedo drive itself. Here is where it all kind of starts falling apart, because upon trying to pound out the shifting rod in order to get rid of the shifting fork, I shifted the transmission into third gear and shifted even further, because obviously this is stuck against here, and then I pushed out the input shaft and the synchro ring with it, and then this piece went too far and you can see these pawls disengaging, and I haven't quite understood everything that it says here, but it specifically told me to take care which orientation this ring was in respect to all the teeth on here, and mark me that. So now everything has fallen apart and I don't know where what is. And something's bound to happen here as well. And I don't even know, because all the terminology in here is so caddywampus, I don't even know what to mark in accordance to what. So I think we'll just have to throw it all apart and then get it back step by step through logic. And if it doesn't work, take it apart again, put it back together. Alright, I'm back from probably the most manliest of dishwashing events, and now I can start reassembling this stuff. Since I don't know what I'm doing, or even worse, I'm at that point where I think I know what I'm doing. Clearly I don't. I mean, you're talking to the guy who sandblasted his transmission, but I feel confident enough to say that this all looks the same. This here doesn't. This has like notches and cutouts and whatnot. So I think the position in which this goes on here doesn't matter, but the position in which this is relative to that all might. So, you know, look, there is a cutout right there. So there is this thing which has an arrow, and we'll point it towards the front, and that sits in there. That makes sense, right? So I'm taking notes here, and well, they told me to put the hooks of each spring so that they are in the same notch, and one spring goes that way around and one spring goes that way around. Seems to make sense. And now I'm going to glue these in place with grease, and then slide this over here, capture these, and then do the same with the rear. Now these rear ones, they don't have arrows, but well, probably there is only one way in which makes sense. We'll find out. According to the manual, the lumps are supposed to show towards the front, so that I did. Lined up the synchronizer ring here with the notch, so the thing can do its thing. And now I'm going to lather it with oil, slide that on there, and booyakasha. Please do keep in mind, however, that this goes over there and that goes over here, because otherwise the drawing is not happy. I can't see how this would make the transmission not work, but yeah, we'll have to do a swapperoo here. The shifting fork looks a little worn out to me, if you compare it to the other one. So, I'm going to try and fix that with fire. Okay, I've left this to cool slowly overnight, because while this fires like cast iron, I don't really know what it is. Could be any sort of forged steel. Now we've got some nice amount of meat on here, which we can then file back down in order to make it fit. the slot in the gear. I still can't trust this thin plastic piece. So, rather than do that, I've decided to ruin the shift link and make 2 half slugs out of bronze, which can now be profile pressed onto here, like so. And I can then solder this all together, machine a ball onto here with this external diameter, and that should make me happy. In my opinion, this should work out. I really don't like slotted grub screws, especially if they have to be really tight, because they get sunk into a bore, and when you wrench on this, then you're opening up the slot, thus bending the screw open, possibly even cracking it. And even by just bending it inside that bore, you're just going to make it harder to remove. And then you're going to wear out all the sides because they are gold and the threads are going to be ruined. So what I've done is I've bought some fine thread grub screws with hex on the inside, socket head, and then machined a 16-degree taper on them. And so now they are the perfect replacement for the slotted screws. I can really tighten them down nicely without fearing anything.
My. Just listen to that pretty music. You know, that music really does touch my heart. Boy, I'd love to sing that song, but believe me, I sure is too tired.
sleeping in the sun. How you expect to get your day's work done? You never get your day's work done if you're sleeping in the noonday sun. Why, you lazy bones, sleeping in the shade. How'd you expect to get your cornmeal made? Never get your cornmeal made by sleeping in the evening shade. Yeah, and when taters need spraying, I bet you keep praying the slugs fall off of the vine. And when you go fishing, I bet you keep wishing them fish won't grab at your line. Oh, you lazy bones, loafing through the day, how you expect to make a dime that way?
It turns, it can be shifted, it works. Hardest part, put the shift fork for reverse and first in, because you have to pre-tension the spring-loaded ball. You have to hammer in the fork, which is quite a tight fit on the shifting shaft. And while you're hammering in, all the little synchronizer balls and notch grapplings try to come out the other way. The shaft is falling out. It's really not that simple. Glad it's all together. It all seems to work nicely. So now I can put the top gasket on here, put the cover on, slap it underneath the car, fill it with oil, and reassemble the rest of the car. Conveniently, the gasket in the front makes a bow around the main shaft axle. Now you can guess if this is flooded with oil, where oil is going to come out. So I've smudged that in with some silicone sealant as well. Other than that, nothing I can really add to the instructions. So I've jacked the front of the car up and the rear of the car. Now the rear is supported on the frame so that the springs extend downward, and that pulls the entire drive shaft back and out of the transmission. So then I've loosened the screws which hold the drive shaft to the rear end, and now because it's pulled out that way, I can push it back in, get it out of the notches in the rear end, and then hopefully uninstall the entire thing. Status report. I've taken out the bridge which holds the transmission onto the frame. The engine is held with a jack and then tipped down as far as it'll go. And by doing that, it gives you just enough room, very hard to spot against the light, to slide a ratchet in here and remove the nuts which bolt the transmission case to the engine. Now, the instruction book says to loosen the flange nuts which hold the exhaust tube to the manifold. However, since I want to swap out this reproduction muffler for a stock one, I've just removed the entire exhaust, which also helps with accessibility. Speedo drive needs to come out first because it interferes with the cross member of the frame. Also, apparently, this transmission can actually be pulled apart. Now, yes, there is sort of a piece of sheet metal that you can clamp around here and slide in between before taking it all apart. But, you know, this works just as well. I was going to take this apart anyways. You can see by all the brass that something's going deeply wrong inside this transmission. I'll have to find that out at some point. For now, I can just slide this out, and there we are. Okay, I've just taken the new transmission housing and mounted it under here to see how it fits. You can see the mismatch in length here. One solution, which would be the easiest, cheapest, would be to use that one hole in the cross member which is right here, drill another hole into the mount, fasten that in place with just one bolt per side, which, well, it's less, but would most likely work out. However, you would see it quite clearly, and I don't know how tech inspection would like that. Another solution would be a bracket, which is 2 holes for bolts in here, and then 2 holes for threads to mount this to cancel out the offset. Can you see where it's been hitting the frame? Well, that's where it's been hitting the frame. You see, I've said it before, that while the overall length of this thing is the same as the old transmission, the main body, the main housing casting, is just that little bit longer, which is why we made the brackets to set it back further. And that distance is what we're fighting here right now, because I can only slide this in at an angle, and then it won't align with the crankshaft nice enough where it will slide through the clutch plate and into the pilot bearing when it comes exaggeratedly like that. Alright, I've forced even more tilt out of the engine. And as you can see, that was just enough to slide the transmission in. Already got it secured with one bolt so it can't come back out again. So yeah, now we'll hook up the shift linkage on the other side. Goes into there. And the speedo connection. Get in the other bolts. And there is some kind of a ground lead somewhere, and then it's time for the drive shaft to go in and the exhaust, and then we're done. Drive shafts in, I've got the shift linkage connected, hooked the gas back up. I had to make a bushing for that, I was worn out too. Ground is hooked up. I've hooked it up differently because that long stud that would show out the back of the transmission where this would usually get hooked up was so long that it wouldn't fit between the frame and the transmission as usual. So I've went down here, should work just as nicely. Now all that's left is the exhaust. I'm going to do that tomorrow because I'm exhausted. Oh yeah, and I should probably take the drive shaft out again and get the handbrake cable out of the way, because if I let that car down, that's not going to jive. No, it's not jiving now even.
Tomorrow.
Well, that rightened itself through YouTube video magic. The exhaust is in as well. Went in with a lot less trouble than I would have thought. Maybe because now it's the original piece which is supposed to be underneath here. My muffler sealant exhaust shmoo putty hardened itself out, so I couldn't use any of that. We'll see how leak-proof all this is going to be. But for now, I'll be excited to hear what it sounds like. And I'm also excited to get this thing back on its four wheels. Das kann ich irgendwie rum, das ist aber falsch. So I took the car out for a spin. First, second and reverse worked fine, however third just didn't want to engage. No chance, as soon as I let the clutch come, the car popped out of gear. So went back in the garage and removed the cover from the transmission to see what's going on inside. And first I thought it was the shift linkage which wasn't selecting the shift forks reliably, and so I hunted down excessive play in the components. Can you see how much that is moving? And said, well, no problem, I've got another transmission, I can just rob the part of that. Haha! You see, not only are the balls different sizes, the entire linkage is a different length, and the base has a different hole distance. This whole thing has gone way overboard, so I figured might as well solder this back up and file it down to fit. You know, every bit of wear just adds up in this linkage. With all excessive play eliminated, the shift forks were now reliably selected and everything worked fine. I had also looked into all the manuals that I had and found out one little detail. Take a close look down in there onto that shaft, and now watch. Do you see that? Stuck a screwdriver in there, and I was able to pull the input shaft into the transmission a good bit. And that one's on me. Namely, they're talking about a bevel washer which goes in between the engine and the transmission. Looks like this, and it slides over this bearing and presses that in, because that's all that keeps the transmission shaft from shifting in and out. Now, when I took this out of the car, there was nothing mounted here, so I didn't figure I'd need to mount it when putting the new one in. Well, joke's on me, because that's most likely the reason why this transmission is so worn out on the teeth, because third was never engaged all the way. It was just part ways on there, and it was enough to drive around, but not enough to transmit the power reliably and free of wear. So, got this nice little ring here. In order to get that onto the shaft, the whole transmission needs to come out. Now it's time to get this fella in place. And it will sit right there. Ta-da! I've climbed behind the wheel and took my spin around the block. Same story. So I took the transmission cover plate back off again, had a look inside, and I think that the shifting fork just doesn't push the ring gear far enough over the input shaft for it to reliably engage. As soon as I twist on the drive shaft, the ring gear wants to come back out of engagement. So there's really no way around taking the transmission out yet another time and either figure out what's wrong inside this box, or try and rebuild the other one, or find yet another transmission. So why not just rebuild the old transmission like you used to do it? When I turn this thing around, I don't know what I should do first. Take this apart to see what the hell is going on in here. By the way, we have glitter galore once again after just a few thousand kilometers. I cannot rebuild this one because not only are these gear teeth worn in, but also their counterparts in this spline. And I can't get this anywhere. So that's a pipe dream. One possible reason might be that the shift beam actually protrudes the housing of the transmission when engaged all the way. So if we bolt the engine up to that, then that's going to get pushed back in a little bit. Off camera I ground the thing down to sit flush with an angle grinder. I later found out that the engines that this transmission was actually made to be mounted to have little indentations in the flywheel housing where the shifting bars can extend into. But I'm not fully convinced yet. In my opinion, this fella, I keep calling it the ring gear for lack of a better term. Maybe you can see it too. As soon as I put torque onto the input shaft, the ring gear wants to move out and away. When it's fully engaged, it just about clears. In fact, the input shaft sits a little bit proud even. And when you take a close look, that's the amount of play it has. And now when I torque this thing in one direction and slightly drag on it, and torque it in the other and slightly drag on it, then, I know this isn't scientific, but in the direction that the car would usually run, it's easier to pull apart. Matter of fact, it has a tendency to come apart, as opposed to in the direction that, shall we say, engine braking would work on it. And if you look very, very closely, I mean, it's minute. But can you see that from this tooth, for example, from the left downwards to the right upwards, there's a slight slope on these teeth. Is that enough to make something come out of gear? I don't know. If this were a Ford Model A, then this would run another 1,000 years.
3 hours later.
This is the last chance that I'm going to give this transmission. I've sourced a new slider here. And with this one you can actually tell what they mean by take care of what's been assembled where. Can you see this one tooth here is super polished. These ones aren't. And then this one is once again. And there is a third one down the line. Right there. Those are the ones which this pawl slides back and forth under. So, now I know how to assemble this one. It also doesn't have as much wear on the sides of the teeth. So here is my very scientific testing method. Should have done this with the old, to be honest, but forgot to. Anyways, I've chucked this up here, put it into third, and now I'm levering with all my strength on here, and I cannot get third to pop out. Maybe there is still hope. Ta-da! So the transmission is back in. We're doing a little bit of a test drive right now. Pardon the dirty windshield, but well, that's the way it is. That'll be $3.50, sir. I will say, though this transmission works fine now, it's a bit louder than the old one was. It's also harder to shift into first gear, which is odd because it's synchronized, but you have to sort of wrestle probably through the synchronizer in order to get the gears aligned. The gears themselves, except for third, which is of course direct drive, are louder in my opinion, which is probably a sign that the transmission has done a lot more miles than the one I previously had. Well, which speaks for the worn out pieces which I took out. Other than that, this transmission seems to run smoother, especially when you go faster. Then you do notice that the car is much more responsive on the throttle pedal. I reckon because the other transmission was eating itself up, a lot of that energy you put onto the throttle actually went into destroying the transmission and not propulsing the car forward. Synchronization on this car works beautifully. Nothing seems to be worn out here. And yeah, after a lot of wrenching, finally, third gear stays where it is. And I don't need to worry about that anymore. Welcome from inside the car. We're heading straight for the motorway. Uphill, which this particular hill would be one of those where it would throw the gear out. That's all the 40 horses can do, doing about 95 kilometers an hour. And the transmission keeps in gear just fine. With the old transmission, not only would it jump out of gear, but it wasn't even possible to climb this gear at 90 kilometers an hour. It would slow down, probably due to internal friction. However, this transmission is louder. Yeah, fuck.
Action!
Accelerating up the hill full blast, no issues.
Verhungert.
to do it for a brutal shakedown test of this poor little car. And now we will fall back a little bit and enjoy the drive.